You're not on.
Oh, I'm not
There
on.
you
That's
go.
right. I'm sorry.
There you go.
I accidentally hit the wrong mic. That last caller got me thinking about my political career and totally messed me up.
Cannon and Campbell.
Yes.
In 2024.
Yes, 24. Cannon Campbell 24. But yeah, as I was alluding to at the beginning of the show, Rev, I saw this article about autism earlier this week, and I had no idea that it had become this sort of endemic in our society, but it has apparently soared 28 times since the 1960s. That's what this article written. I got it from Epcot Times. Big shout out to Joseph Mercola, who actually wrote it. But he was saying that he basically talked about how in the mid 60s the autism rate was 1 in 10,000. But by 2012 it had risen to 1 in 88. And then 1 in 68 as of 2016. And now we're looking at an autism rate of 1 in 44 8-year-olds in this country. Now in California, where incidence is the highest, 1 in 26 8-year-olds, 1 in 26 8-year-olds has a diagnosis of autism. Now Missouri has the lowest incident at a rate of 1 in 60, which is still astronomical in comparison to where it was in the 1960s, according to the CDC. Now, they say that the dramatic uptick is in part to improved and more comprehensive identification.
Yeah.
However, improved diagnosis alone cannot explain this trend. 1 in 44 children were not autistic in the 1980s with or without diagnosis. So something else is going on. And actually in this article, he goes into the environmental factors that are clearly having a devastating impact on our children. Later on in the show, we're going to talk about some of those factors, some of the things, the poisons that we have in our society. According to a 2020 scientific review in the journal Seminars of Pediatric Neurology, several lines of evidence implicate mitochondria in the pathophysiological of autism spectrum disorder, or ASD. For many years, it was believed to be due to genetics, but now empirical studies have shown genetic predispositions play a smaller role. So what is playing a larger role? Now the authors are pointing to novel abnormalities in mitochondrial function that have been found in autistic children, and the fact that treatments targeting mitochondrial dysfunction such as L-Carnitine supplementation and ketogenic diets have indeed been fruitful. Now in 2007, approximately 4% of autistic children could be diagnosed with a definite mitochondrial disease. More recent investigations looking at mitochondrial biomarkers and electron transport chain, y'all gonna have to just bear with me and sort of soak this in. Now, electron transport chain activity suggests mitochondrial abnormalities may be involved in as many as 80% of the cases. Now, the biomarkers of mitochondrial dysfunction include elevated levels of lactate, alanine, ubiquinone, carnitine, with low levels being an indication of dysfunction, creatine kinase, and pyruvate, and carnitines. As by the authors, this is remarkably interesting because mitochondria are very vulnerable to environmental factors. In other words, something in our environment is triggering the mitochondrial dysfunction in an ever-growing percentage of American children. Now, what is it? Okay, children whose autism is rooted in mitochondrial dysfunction will typically have a key set of symptoms that include fatigability, gastrointestinal disorders, a history of seizures and or epilepsy, motor function delays or muscle weakness, and unusual neurodevelopmental regression, including multiple regressions or regression later than commonly associated with ASD. Now, it's important. Now, the thing I liked about this article is that it actually showed some treatments. They've shown that there have been some treatments that have actually benefited the young people who they had diagnosed with ASD. So 2 helpful treatments have been mentioned. L-Carnitine Supplementation, I see that at Walmart all the time, and ketogenic diets. Studies evaluating these ketogenic diets and ASD have found them to be well tolerated by the majority of children. A review of 4 studies found 18% of children saw significant improvement on a ketogenic diet, 40% reported moderate improvement, and 32% had mild improvement. Only 8%, a small 8%, experienced a worsening of their symptoms. In cases where ASD is caused by mitochondrial dysfunction, however, supplementing specific cofactors become important. Now, the good news is this kind of supplementation is very safe and well tolerated according to the studies. There's been virtually no risk involved. Among the most important nutritional cofactors are B vitamins, including niacin, which is B3, riboflavin, which is B2, biotin, which is B7, I take biotin, thiamine, which is B1, and pyroxine, which is B6, pantothenic acid, B5, methylcobalamin, which is B12, and B9, reduced folate. Also, L-carnitines, alpha-lipoic acid, vitamin C, zinc, coenzyme Q10, vitamin E, and N-acetyl L-cysteine. Okay, now why is it important to talk about this? Because as we talk about all the time here on this show, we live in one of the most polluted areas in the country.
Right.
We really do. We live in an area that has really sort of distinguished itself as being toxic. I believe Indiana, and I was just looking this up because I was going through our archives of shows a few days ago, and we did a story, I think it was last year, about Indiana being the most toxic state in the union. Do you remember that, Rev?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so when we talk about a lot of these developmental issues that we're having here in this city and in our region, a lot of that may come down to a lot of the things that we have pumped in us on a daily basis. Now, how does this apply to our daily lives? Well, you see, there's been a lot of talk about putting more truck stops and putting more truck depots here in the city of Gary, and there's been pushback, even against Fulcrum, because the fear is, I remember when they had the Maya Energy, remember the whole Maya Energy controversy that we had? There was always this pushback saying that we have too many things in our environment here in the city of Gary already. Too much pollution already. We don't need more truck stops in residential areas. And so if what this study is to be said is to be believed, and the toxic chemicals that have been implicated in autism and other forms of developmental problems, we have to start asking ourselves in the city of Gary exactly how do we as a city and a region. I don't want to just say it's Gary, because if you live in East Chicago, you got, whatever it's called now. I don't know if it's ArcelorMittal. Cleveland Cliffs.
Oh yeah. Right.
You got Cleveland Cliffs. When my father worked there for 45 years, it was Inland Steel. Okay. Then it was ISPAT. Then it was ArcelorMittal. Now I think it's Cleveland Cliffs. But you've got that, and you've got LTV, and you've got is Youngstown still there? I believe Youngstown is still in that environment.
Really?
I don't know. Maybe it's gone.
I thought it closed.
I think it may have closed.
Steel.
But these mills, these factories that churn out so much pollution are a big part of our identity here in the city of Gary and in our region, Lake County, and like in what is called the Rust Belt in general.
Mm-hmm.
So learning now that some of these things may have effects on our children. I don't have any children, thank God, because, you know, it seemed like I feel so much for you guys who are parents, because it seems like society's attacking y'all from every angle.
Mm-hmm.
From the environment to the culture to schools to the healthcare. You know, we talked about the vaccine. Definitely next week I want to talk about how they're forcing a vaccine on basically toddlers now. But exactly how do we get out of this mess when so much of our identity is wrapped up in these factories that may now be polluting us and causing our children to have these developmental disorders, Rev?
Well, you know, it's just like the other day, Natalie and Carolyn McCready came on at 1 o'clock, and they were talking about primarily, I think, about the Zurich, but also about Fulcrum.
Right.
And at one point, Miss McCready made the point that, look, we are a heavily contaminated city. And so any additional contamination is not going to be good for us.
Right.
And I don't dispute that. My question is, given that fact, two things. One, why aren't we demanding that all these polluters cease and desist immediately? And two, what kind of businesses can we bring in that don't have any sort of pollution footprint? Because if we're in such a bad state that any pollution level, any pollution added to it is catastrophic.
Right.
And that's basically the argument she was making. It's catastrophic. Well, but we've got USX sitting right there.
Right.
The other day, Dr. Williams had called me and told me that people in Miller were smelling something terrible. And so they were calling NIPSCO, trying to find out, was there a natural gas leak or something? NIPSCO came out and said, no, it's not natural gas. They theorized it was something at U.S. Steel. I called. U.S. Steel called back. One of their media reps said, no, we haven't had any issues. And then later on that day, I went out, got in my car, drove over by the post office over on Martin Luther King.
Mm.
Now, if you drive up, I guess it's Central, 15th Avenue, I think it is. On the one side, you got the post office. To the south of it, there used to be a gas station.
Right, right.
To the east of it, there is some sort of business that has a lot of trucks with tanker type truck vehicles.
Right, I see that.
To the west, you got NIPSCO, and then there's another trucking company.
Mm-hmm.
To the north, I think there is another trucking entity there.
Right.
Well, I come in, and I'm heading east on 15th, and as I pass between the post office and that former gas station, I smelled it. Now, when I had the windows up, and I drove down to that far end truck station, I didn't smell anything. And so I'm calling, Dr. Williams back and said, no, I don't smell anything. But then when I'm coming back, I come into the post office and I smelled it. But it was kind of faint. So then I go through the parking lot, I come out, and I'm getting onto, I forget what street that was, but it would have been traveling north-south. And as I move away from the post office, it hit me like a ton of bricks. Now, the problem is I have no idea what caused that odor.
Right.
I don't think it came from the post office unless, somebody's been, burying bodies at the post office.
Right.
But from somewhere, there is something. But here's my point. We've had so much gunk, garbage, toxins, chemicals released in our air, released in the water, leaching into the ground. If you're going to say that you're environmentally conscious, how do you say that on the one hand and not say
Yeah.
And as the start of our demands, we demand that U.S. Steel cease operations immediately.
Right.
Close its operations. As the old saying goes, we don't care. Don't go away mad. Just go away.
Right. Right. I absolutely.
If Fulcrum, which is supposedly a green company, according to every report I've read about it, it prides itself on its, relative greenness. If even that sort of company, a company that has as its defined mission statement, turning trash into something usable that has a lower carbon footprint than it originally had in its original, components, a lower carbon footprint. If that can tip the scales for us, if trucks driving through can tip the scales for us, how do you say that U.S. Steel doesn't tip the scales every day?
Right. That's absolutely true. And again, because this city was built by U.S. Steel for U.S. Steel and has become our identity, what exactly can we do? Maybe our caller has an answer. Hello, caller.
I just want to say, why everybody got a problem now? Nobody had a problem when the old folks was working at the steel mill.
I don't know. I don't know.
Okay. I don't know.
I don't know why. Although from what I understand, people did have a problem with it then.
Well, and let me just say
Outsiders
this:
used to drive through
we
and
didn't
mock
know.
us.
I don't think people understood the full extent of health problems caused by pollution. And I think people didn't know. I think people knew it wasn't good. You had people like, I believe, what's the guy who's the
Ralph Nader?
No. I'm talking about here in Gary. The Nature Center is named after who is the guy that the Nature Center is named after? Well, whoever the guy that the Nature Center is named after. He was involved in helping to clean up this area, I think about 50, 60 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And so people knew that pollution wasn't great, but I don't think they understood the extent that pollution affected us all. And even now, like I said, we're just now learning about stuff like autism. We're just now learning about stuff like lead poisoning.
Yeah.
Like a lot of people, a lot of criminologists, as we talked about on this show, there was a precipitous crime drop that started in this country in the 1990s. Up until the pandemic, basically. We saw crime fall from the early 90s all the way to the pandemic, and you had all these criminologists and social scientists trying to figure out why crime fell so much in such a short period of time, where crime goes down for 30 straight years. And a lot of people actually hypothesized that it was once we stopped putting lead in gasoline, and once we stopped putting lead in paints.
Mm-hmm.
And that a lot of the behavioral outbursts that we saw in the 1960s and 70s and 80s, the historic crime rates that we saw, was due to a lot of children growing up with developmental issues from
lead.
So I don't know if that's the case. I personally think a lot of it has to do with technology. I think young men are in the house a lot more than they used to be, therefore there's less crime. But a lot of other people thought it was abortion. A lot of people thought that, tracked it to abortion. Freakonomics.
I've heard that.
Freakonomics actually said, look, if you look at when crime started to go down, it was when the first children who were aborted due to Roe v. Wade would have been about 20 years old. So that's when they're at the peak of their crime committed. I don't know about that either. Like I said, I generally tend to think, just as somebody who's looked at this, I think that it's technology, because crime went down all over the world at the same time in every Western rich country, at the same exact time. So that's what I would
Interesting.
But there's no doubt that things like lead have some effect. We're seeing it in Flint, Michigan, where and in East Chicago, right there at the Superfund site that was over there in the New Edition Calumet area. We saw children who had developmental issues from that. So there's no doubt that these things are affecting the kids in some capacity, and maybe causing these type of disorders. But again, when this is our identity, this is all we've ever known, This is all we've ever done. How do we get out of it? Maybe our other caller knows.